Some of you may be puzzled as to why we still have our Christmas tree up and a poinsettia and so on. For those who know the Christian tradition, there are 12 days of Christmas, and the 12 days of Christmas end tomorrow. So we are still observing the birth of Christ, and that's why we're today going to have a talk on Good King Wenceslas. But first, announcements. Next Saturday, January the 11th, is Save a Saturday for this month. From 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., you can come and help winterize the center. Of course, you don't have to stay for the full 4 hours. Come as you can, stay as you like. If you're here at lunchtime, pizza is normally served for lunch at 12:30 p.m. So if you can come next Saturday to serve the center and help us winterize the place, get the place all set up for the coldest months, then that will be very helpful. On Saturday, January 25th, we will celebrate the birthdays of Swami Vivekananda and Swami Brahmananda. We'll start at 11 a.m. with a brief talk on these two great souls who founded the Ramakrishna order and began its mission work, of which this place is a part. The puja, conducted by Aditya Chaturvedi, will run from 11:30 to 12:30 approximately, followed by a prasad lunch in the monastery. Food to be offered. If you're going to bring food to be offered for the puja, it must be in the kitchen by 11 a.m. And thank you for observing that, because it really does matter to us. In February, Swami Harinamanandaji will be here, on January 26th. January 26th, I'm jumping ahead of myself. On January 26th, that Sunday, that's why we're celebrating the puja on a Saturday, the Titi pujas on a Saturday, because Harinamanandaji will be here on Sunday, January 26th, to lead a workshop on the Chandi. And this is not to be missed if you find yourself drawn to the Shakti worship, to the understanding of Mother as the force in life. The workshop will start at 10 a.m. It's in 3 one-hour sections, and so ends at 1 p.m. Starts at 10 a.m., ends at 1 p.m., followed by lunch with the Swami. Please bring your own brown bag lunch. There will be snacks and drinks, but please bring your own lunch. And now, in February, Swami Nirakaranandaji of the St. Louis Center will be with us on Saturday the 15th and Sunday the 16th of February to lead a weekend-long retreat on the teachings, the life, and the achievements of Adi Shankaracharya. Details will be in the newsletter as it comes to you, and you can find them also on the website. Now, I understand that Uma Majumdar has some good news for us from Swami Yogeshananda. For those of you who don't know, Swami Yogeshananda was the founder of this center and led it for many, many years, actually a couple of decades.
Greetings of New Year, all of you. The highlight, I should say, grand finale of last year was seeing our beloved Swami Yogeshananda. We both went to visit him, and this is how, if I can enlarge. He was all gutsied up, you know. he sat there like a baby, you know, with no teeth, and white, green, very affectionate, and embraced us, tried to. And he was his usual self, although incapacitated, he cannot walk on his own. He's in a chair, but still, his spirit, his humor, that's as usual. He was very happy to see us. He was appreciating, he was deeply touched that our center is thriving so well. And what is the other thing? Yes, when I talked to him about my students coming here to visit you in center, and I told him how every nook and corner of this center reflects our philosophy, that all religions have place here, honorable place in this place. So he was so touched, he was almost crying like this, and he felt deeply satisfied, and he's in good shape until now. So pray God that he remains like that. Thank you.
Well, we will pray, God, that the Lord's sweet wishes be done, and that the Swami's wishes are honored by the Lord. I know he's been
Those
ready.
who want to see the picture, they're all here.
He's been ready. He says, I've had my bags packed and been ready to go for some time now. So he's going to turn 97 in February, and it looks like he'll make it. So quite a remarkable Swami. For those of you who weren't able to make it last night, we had a wonderful and very spiritually uplifting show from Andy Offit Irwin, a storyteller, singer-songwriter. And if you want to know more about it, rather than hear me, you can talk to Elizabeth Yates, Jyoti, or Shubhradidi about what Andy offered us. But it was part of our 12 Days of Christmas celebration, and it reflected that. The content of his show reflected that, and it was beautiful. So are there any, or you can also talk to Lori about it, for that matter. She was here also. So are there any announcements I should have made that I did not make? All right, we'll begin with our chant. This again is a reflection of the work of our beloved Swami Yogeshananda. This is his translation, when we get to the translation, of this ancient chant. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. Well, once again, good morning and Happy New Year to those of you who I haven't already greeted in that way. And I'm going to start off by singing the song, the Christmas Carol, Good King Wenceslas. Then we'll go on to talk about it. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, and stand by me, if thou know'st it telling, yonder peasant, who is he, where and what his dwelling? Sire, he lives a good league hence, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes' fountain. Bring me meat and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, thou and I shall see him dine, when we bear them thither. Forth they, page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament, and the winter weather. Sire, the night grows darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. Mark my footsteps, my good page, step thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. In his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted, and there was he in the very heat was in the very sod where the saint had printed. Therefore, Christians all rejoice, wealth or rank possessing, you who now shall serve the poor, shall thyselves find blessing. So this is the story of good King Wenceslas, told as a Christmas carol. You may not have enjoyed the whole of Christmas, Charles Dickens might have said, if you had not yet heard the tale of good King Wenceslas. Well, if you have been in that deplorable condition, it will be remedied this morning. You have heard, somewhat ill-sung, the Saint's Christmas carol, and now we'll discuss the parable's inner meanings. Rooted in Christian mystical traditions, the carol's symbolism tells the story of a king who is an humble servant of God in man and a master of spiritual power. First, some context. January is a month for the study of Raja Yoga, a spiritual path often called the yoga of meditation. As a Raja Yogi, you use ancient, proven spiritual techniques to quiet your mind and gain control of your attention. Regular daily practice of Raja Yoga increases your ability to concentrate and may lead to meditation. This can unite you with the divine presence, the source of your being, and liberate you from the cycle of rebirth and death. Raja Yoga, as we all know, as those of us who have been studying for some time know, also leads to the manifestation of the divine perfection already within, which yields those remarkable powers that are sometimes manifested when needed, as was the case with Wenceslas when his page was suffering from the ills of the world and the cold. And that will be part of our discussion this morning. But first, this is a prayer, just to put the whole thing in context. This is a prayer from Swami Paramananda. Those of you who know the Ramakrishna orders, lineages and traditions and so on, may remember that Swami Paramananda was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. He taught in the United States from the late teens and early 1920s onward. He had a place both in Los Angeles, a center in Los Angeles in the 20s, and in Boston and in Cohasset on the East Coast. I believe Cohasset's in Massachusetts also. So, but he traveled a great deal. He traveled a great deal. So other centers also started where he had first put the flag down, so to speak. This is the prayer from Swami Paramananda. All life is to teach us how we may bring the living presence of our ideal into our consciousness. Verily, thou art my life's fulfillment, the cause of my joy and sorrow, laughter and grief, my soul's sunshine and the heart's rain cloud. When our life becomes empty, to fill this emptiness, we try to gather from outside, and we gain emptiness. We try to find something permanent, and we seek it in the fleeting. Consciousness of the presence of the eternal within our soul alone will bring us peace and enduring satisfaction. There is no anarchy or accident in the cosmic universe. There is no uneven distribution of favor and disfavor. Only as we seek that which does not shift or change do we find our fulfillment. O thou infinite and ever blessed one, thou art the conscious being abiding in the hearts of all conscious beings. Do thou fill my heart with a living sense of consecration to thee, that I may learn to follow thy path with unwavering faith and wholehearted devotion. Grant me the spiritual insight that I may know and do thy will. A very powerful prayer. Those of you who want to find it, these notes will be online along with the talk on our website by probably Thursday of this coming week. So that prayer is the frame of reference within which we will look at King Wenceslas and the actions of the king and his page. As we know, cultures use storytelling and parables to share and spread spiritual truths. Written and spoken language, songs, poems, and tales are collected, transcribed. In Christianity, huge numbers of stories and songs about Jesus and his teachings are there. Many are sung as Christmas carols. This morning, the parable of Saint Wenceslas, also good King Wenceslas. But he, as you see, as we'll find, he was actually made a saint. It's a beautiful and moving Christmas song written by John Mason Neal, who lived from 1818 to 1866. As you can see, his life overlapped that of Sri Ramakrishna. So he was in the world at the same time as Sri Ramakrishna, and as we understand it, that raised the spiritual consciousness of the whole world. An Anglican clergyman, Neil had a strong interest in the Eastern Orthodox Church and was probably a Freemason. This Wenceslas carol is his most famous work. The subject is Saint Wenceslas I, Duke of Bohemia, who lived circa 907, his death is certain, to 935. So he didn't live long. He was still young when he died. He's considered a martyr. He was considered a martyr and a saint soon after his death, and named a king by Holy Roman Emperor Otto I. Now, we might think, why name someone a king after their death? How would that work? Well, not only does it give them a special place, but it means a great deal in terms of their progeny, in terms of their lineage. So it was quite a wonderful thing to do. He was made both a saint and named a king. Of course, in Christian tradition, naming someone a king and a saint together also identifies them with Christ, the King of Kings, from the Christian point of view, and and a saint, of course, becomes identified totally with the object of their spiritual discipline. There are saints of many traditions. Christian saints become completely identified with Christ. So this story of Wenceslas became the subject of songs and morality tales carried to royal courts, cities and villages all over Europe by minstrels and jongleurs, as they were called, people who came and sang these stories in lays, as they were called, the European equivalent of bhajans, if you will. And of course, this story of Wenceslas was told in churches. So first, let's take up the parable's meaning in the mystical. First, let's take up the parable's meaning in the mystical Christian context. Then look at it from a Ramakrishna Vedanta perspective. This perspective will identify the characters of the story of aspects of your body-mind complex and relate these to training for your highest spiritual realization. But to begin with, and to understand the Christian meanings, we need this background. Saint Stephen was the first martyr of Christianity. He's venerated as a saint in the Roman Catholic, Anglican, and Eastern Orthodox churches. He's the patron saint of Masons and stonemasons, and so is associated with Freemasonry. His feast day is December 26th. That's in the Roman calendar, or December 27th in the Eastern Orthodox calendar. It's a day for giving gifts again, but especially to the poor. It's called Boxing Day, and in the British Isles, in the British tradition. And so the feast day is there as an observance and to serve the poor. So you can see this right away is that the king is looking out on the feast of Stephen when he sees a poor man, and his response is automatic, as we'll see. But more about St. Stephen from chapter 6 of the Acts of the Apostles. Stephen was one of 7 men of the early church in Jerusalem appointed to serve as a teacher. Because of his teachings, he was denounced for blasphemy against God and Moses, and speaking against the temple and the law, because he was speaking the new Christian covenant. Therefore, he was tried before the Sanhedrin, the highest judgment body of the Jewish state at that time, condemned and stoned to death by a mob, witnessed, perhaps even encouraged, by Saul of Tarsus. We know Saul of Tarsus because he later became St. Paul the Apostle because of his conversion, direct conversion by Christ himself. Stephen's name is derived from Greek Stephanos, meaning crown, invested with a crown of martyrdom. There are a couple of other things that we need to know, particularly within the context of the particular writer of this song. Brightly shone the moon that night. We heard that line, brightly shone the moon that night. This quote I'm going to read is from The Moon in Masonic History by one of the grand historians of the Order of Freemasonry. Quote, "There is no more spectacular reminder of our Masonic historical and ritualistic heritage than the moon at the height of its fullness. While astronomers view the moon with the analytical eye of science, the moon has been a focal point for cultures around the world throughout history and has inspired music, poetry, and religion alike. And of course, as we know from Chaitanya's prayer, O name stream down in moonlight on the lotus heart, opening its cup to knowledge of thyself, which is a subject for another talk, but it is definitely a mystical reference to the significance of the moon and moonlight. And then in the Chandi it says of the mother, Mother, you are the moon and moonlight and happiness itself. In Freemasonry, the moon is associated with wisdom and secret teachings. So right away, the introduction of moon and moonlight in this is a cue that we're going to deal with something of the wisdom tradition and the secret teachings of Christianity. And you remember the line, Sire, he lives a good league hence. Most of us no longer remember what a league is in terms of a measure of distance. Just so you'll get a sense of how far this man was from home, looking for some firewood to keep body and soul together, a league is 3 miles, about 3 miles. So he was going to have to make a 6-mile round trip to gather some firewood in that bitter cold night. And for those of you who've ever been in a place where it gets bitterly cold, I mean below zero, really cold. I chanced as a boy to live in the Alps, the foothills of the Alps in Bavaria, Germany. So I experienced this firsthand. It is, it's truly awe-inspiring how cold it can get. And that's what is meant by the opening lines of this song. The frost was cruel. The snow lay round about deep and crisp and even, deep and crisp. It had been snowing a long time. It was very, very cold. So this man, this poor man, was it was 3 miles from home. So here's a verse-by-verse discussion of Good King Wenceslas. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen. We've heard of the feast of Stephen, what that's about. It's about a day devoted, the day after Christmas, to honoring and serving the poor. So good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Now, for those of you who know European tradition of the Middle Ages, it was possible to be hung for gathering firewood, even downed firewood, within the forest fence, as it's called in this song, within the perimeter of the king's domain, the personal domain. So this man knew, of course, the monarch that he was a part of the community for, so he probably didn't have any fear. But you'll hear this song sung sometimes, this verse sung, hither page and stand by me, if thou know'st it telling, yonder peasant, who is he, where and what his dwelling. You'll sometimes hear it sung very fiercely, as if the king is about to, pounce on the guy. That's not how I read it at all. I think the king is filled with wonder at this man who's 3 miles from home. At least he's way inside the forest fence, almost to the castle, can be clearly seen. We know he can be clearly seen because of what the page answers. Sire, he lives a good league hence, 3 miles, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence. In other words, the fence that divides the land of the peasants from the land of the king, by St. Agnes Fountain. Now, this is St. Agnes. These saints, particularly the women saints, were busy serving the poor. Saint Agnes was of the order of St. Clare, which is associated with the Franciscans, and she had taken a spring that existed at the foot of the mountain and turned it into a dependable source of running water for the villagers that lived nearby, or a village probably sprang up around it. But in any event, that was one of the things that these saintly nuns did, was take a spring and turn it into something where it wouldn't be trashed by people dealing with it carelessly. And so anyway, St. Agnes turned it into a fountain. So the king right away understands exactly who this is. And his response is saintly. Bring me meat and bring me wine. Bring me pine logs. This man is out there gathering fallen wood. Fragments of wood, little bits and pieces that he can bundle up and carry home. And the king is saying, bring me pine logs, big logs. And you'll often see pictures of the king carrying the logs in his arms. That's not how they would have done it. They would have put the meat and the wine and these logs on a small sled, which is called a sledge. And they would have pulled it along with them. So bring me meat and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither. Thou, and notice this is again a very profound clue in this as to the nature of Wenceslas. He does not address the page in the familiar way, you. He doesn't say you and I. He says thou and I will see him die. It's the formal and respectful way. As it says in Chaitanya's prayer, take no honor to thyself, give honor to all. And so this is a sign of the monarch's sainthood. He addresses his page. A page was a respected position. It is they were very close to the people they served. It was a position of rank, a page. But normally, a king would not address anyone but another king or someone of some equal high rank as thou. This king addresses his page as thou. Thou and I will see him dine when we bear them thither. So the king knows that they're going to walk 3 miles through this bitter cold night to bring this man and his family some food, some drink, and warmth on the feast of Stephen. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament and the bitter weather. And believe me, it can get just exactly that. And so they've gone a ways, and the page says, Sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how. I can go no longer. Isn't this us in the rudeness and wintry weather of the world that we experience, whether it's physical or psychological? We sometimes just feel as if we can go on no longer. We just get weary. It's just too hard. And so what is the solution? as far as the king is, the saint is concerned. Mark my footsteps, my good page. Tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. And what do all of the great ones say to us? All of the great teachers who come, what do they say? Follow my instructions. Do what I tell you to do. And everything will be all right. Krishna says it in the Gita. Give yourself entirely to me, and I will take care of you. I will take care of all of your needs. You will not be dispossessed. Christ says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and he gives the instructions very nicely in the Sermon on the Mount for what that means, one of which is love thee one another, serve the poor, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. Sri Ramakrishna. Follow my instructions, and the world's great sea in its wrath will seem like a puddle in a footprint in the clay. Hoofprint. Follow my instructions. Do as I suggest. Do as I tell you. And the world's great sea in its wrath will be as a puddle in a hoofprint in the clay. So this is what the teachers always say. Mark my footsteps, how I do this. Mark my footsteps, my good page. Tread thou in them boldly. And once again, Krishna says, without reservation. If I tell you what to do it as I've told you to do without reservation. Tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. This is the promise of these great teachers all, that if we follow their instructions, we will be cared for and things will be taken care of. It doesn't mean no bad thing will ever happen to us in our life. That's not what it means at all. It just means that you will deal with it much differently than you would have otherwise. And so the next lines are, in his master's steps he trod. Where the snow lay dinted, heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. In other words, what this page needed to go on with his service to the poor was his blood needed to be warmed. Heat was in the very sod that the saint had printed. And of course, this is what I was alluding to earlier when I said in the practices that we call Raja Yoga, these spiritual practices of concentration and meditation, which in Patanjali's sutra is called samyama, these abilities to share, to manifest and share these extraordinary powers come to you. It's not that you seek them. It's not that you are looking for power. They simply arise because of your intense ability to concentrate and therefore meditate on a particular thing. And so the king was able to say, this saint was able to say, just walk in my footsteps and there will be warmth for you. In his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted, heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Notice this is the first time, and it's capitalized, this is the first time in this carol where Wenceslas is called a saint. Heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christians all, be sure wealth or rank possessing, those who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. It's the instructions of the great ones, the great teachers. Swami Vivekananda's lectures on Karma Yoga are just about this, about being selfless, about service, about taking the opportunity to serve. Anytime there is the opportunity to serve, you are to regard it as a great gift and to do everything you can to serve. This is the topic of his book. It's gathered together. These lectures are gathered together as a book, Karma Yoga. If you read them, you'll see many instances where, and a couple of instances where beings actually are willing to give their lives themselves in the service of someone in need. Therefore, Christians all, be sure, wealth or rank possessing, those who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. And of course, that blessing of selflessness, as soon as that really takes hold in us, when we're no longer blinded by the bondage of the small self, we see clearly the truth of our being behind it, the spiritual truth of the being behind it. And so now we're going to talk about Ramakrishna Vedanta and Good King Wenceslas, to just see how what I'm saying actually manifests in the teachings. As we know, devotion and service are keys to a successful path of discrimination and renunciation. When we look at things in terms of, when we look at things not in terms of how will this affect me, how will this benefit me, what is the I, me, mine of this? Instead, we look at it in terms of thou, thee, thine. When we see things with that idea of devotion and service, that allows us to discriminate. Oh, this is good to do. This leads in the direction that I want to go. And this does not. And therefore allows us more easily to renounce, which means to let go of, not push away, not suppress, simply let go of those things that we have identified as impediments to our spiritual progress. This is, if we to return for a moment to Raja Yoga, if you think of the yamas and niyamas, the restraints and the observances of Raja Yoga, you'll see that it points directly to this. As Dennis Waite says in the Book of One, acquiring the discipline that will enable a mind to take on board the message of Vedanta. When we begin to think in terms of thou, thee, thine, instead of I, me, mine, that discipline will enable the mind to take on board the message of Vedanta. From our perspective, and of course it wasn't written from this perspective, but we can see it in this perspective, this parable is instructive at the level of this subtle body or the soul. The subtle body is what the Christians, there's a rough equivalence between what we think of as the soul, that which transmigrates, and the subtle body. And the soul in Christian, the Christian idea of the soul. From our perspective, the king, King Wenceslas, would be the buddhi, the discriminative faculty, the decider. The page would be seen as the faculties of mind, the servant ego. And the poor man is suffering humanity, struggling to keep the inner fire burning, trying to keep on living as they do, according to Thoreau, a life of quiet desperation, willing to go to great lengths to try and keep themselves alive and sustain themselves. So as we know from our instruction from yoga psychology, the buddhi receives information from the mind and illumines a course of action. The buddhi doesn't do the action, it simply suggests, simply illumines a course of action. When we're young, we know what our conscience tells us to do and not do, because we're still in touch with our buddhi, still in touch with that discriminative faculty. But as we age, as we get older, we learn to suppress this inner voice. And so we become less and less attentive to the correct course of action that the buddhi is suggesting to us. And of course, in this case, the service, bring me meat and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither. Thou and I will see him dine when we bear them thither. Is this a contrivance of the mind of Wenceslas? No, it's just a spontaneous reaction to what he sees in front of him. Is the buddhi within him simply says, this guy, he's 3 miles from home, gathering bits and pieces of fallen wood to try and keep himself and his family together. Let's help. And so he says to the servant mind, he says to the servant, we'll take him some meat and some wine and some pine logs and make sure that he doesn't have to suffer through this night, this terrible night. And of course the mind struggles with the oppositions of the world, the rude winds of wild lament and the bitter weather. And this is particularized as the page has followed his instructions and is going with the monarch to take what they are taking to the poor man, to join the poor man and take him home and give him these gifts. But this rude winds, wild lament, the bitter weather, sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. As I said earlier, we all know that feeling.
Would you slightly speak up, Brother Shankar?
I said we all know that feeling. We all know that sense that I can go no longer. And the buddhi as guru, if we think of the buddhi as guru, and spiritual practice yields that mastery to where the guru, our mind becomes our guru, is said. That's the 4th grace. In this case, it's symbolized, it's written down as, mark my footsteps, my good page. Tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage, freeze thy blood less cold. So this is what the instruction is to the lower mind. And the lower mind, in his master's steps he trod. Where the snow lay dinted, heat was in the very sod, which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christians all be sure, wealth or rank possessing, those who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. Which is the wonderful conclusion of good King Wenceslas. And it will be the last of our observances of the Christian tradition of marking the new year by studying and worshiping Christ until next year. Or actually until Easter. There'll be something at Easter as well. So now comes the wonderful part of this time where you have an opportunity to ask your questions, if you have any, whatever this gave rise to in you as a question, or make any comment that you have about what was said, or anything else that of spiritual nature that interests you. Anyone? Yes, Paul.
Yes, that's a real, thank you very much for the talk, and I definitely will add that song to my playlist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a very beautiful song. It has a lot of very uplifting and positive ideas. I have a little of that, the very last line of, ye who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that starts to turn it into a spiritual materialism. That if you want a blessing, you've got to do this, as opposed to the intrinsic value of just doing something because it's good. That now you're looking, I'll do this because I know that I will then receive a blessing. And it seems like that brings it down to more of an exoteric level of understanding, and maybe that's necessary. But as an esoteric teaching, I object to that line.
I think it is very well read by you that it could be an exoteric, it could be this Lord, but it depends on what you mean by blessing. If you become selfless, something wonderful happens. If you become selfless, something wonderful happens. As Jesus put it, and this is not an equation of a lower form like this, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. Now when he means all else, he means all else. He means the highest as well as the lowest. You won't, he said, elsewhere Christ says, we care about the sparrows. Do you think we don't care about you? If you'll just let go, you'll be taken care of. If you'll just become a passerby, not cling to life, life will take care of you. And of course, we do want to be taken care of, don't we? We do. So I understand your objection, and I agree that it's a possible reading of it, but I think there's a higher reading of it. That the blessing that is being spoken of is a spiritual blessing, not meat, wine, and pine logs. Thanks, Paul. That was good. Anybody else? Yes, dear.
Comment. I love the symbolism.
Yes.
The only difference that I see between Eastern and Western perspective on aging, when you say that as we age, myself included, we become more full of self and not selfless. But Eastern perspective on is that we become wiser, that we, compared to when we're young, we are full of energy, we are full of me, and not as conscientious as people who age because of experience, because of having gone through similar circumstances in life. So most of the Eastern religious books, they talk about prajna. Prajna is deeper than reasoning, deeper than buddhi. So hopefully, aging people or those who are old are associated with wisdom. Unlike youth, which is rash and brash. That's how I just thought.
Very well remarked. And it's true that the culture that we live in here is very, very self-centered. Whether that's true elsewhere, I can't say a personal experience. But certainly we see it here. We see that this is, and this is why the great teachers come again and again. Sri Ramakrishna said, I'll have to come back in 200 years. You know, what will start as a result of my being here this time, from 1836 to 1886, the shoot that will rise up will turn into some very serious materialism and look at what we're experiencing. So he said, I'll have to come back, and of course he nominated a time which we can specify as 2086. I mean, I'm not trying to say that's when it will happen, but that's what he said. 200 years after his departure, he would come back. Because, as Vivekananda points out in his talk, Christ the Messenger, when this trough happens in spiritual life, in human life, then naturally a wave will also come after it. There's no trough without a wave coming after it. So Sri Ramakrishna will come again. Christ said, I will come again. And of course, those of us who studied Christianity from something other than the limited perspective from the perspective of Swami Prabhavananda's The Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta, if we see the Christian tradition in that way, we see Christ has come many times. And he comes in the form of every one of his saints. And they're not all in monasteries or convents. He manifests himself. He says, those who study my teachings and assimilate them. I'm paraphrasing now, but this is what he meant. Those who study my teachings and fully assimilate them, I become that person. And so the saints actually manifest these aspects. Padre Pio actually manifested the stigmata of Christ's crucifixion because he was so closely identified with Christ's passion. So we can, the more unlimited we can make our thinking, the less limitation we impose on our thinking, the better off we will be. As Sri Ramakrishna said, if all of us, all human beings are mad. They're mad for something. They're mad for money. They're mad for lust. They're mad for fame. He said, be mad for God. Which to other people looks like you've gone a little crazy. Well, so what? So what? Be mad for God. Yes, dear.
Could you define God, please?
Say it again.
Could you define God?
Well, no, I cannot, and you know perfectly well I cannot. If God could be defined, God would not be God. We think of God as the living presence within us that animates this. As it says in the chant that we'll chant over the food that we're about to enjoy, those who see Brahman in every action attain to Brahman. Brahman is the offering. Brahman is the ritual. Brahman is she who, or he who offers to the fire that is Brahman. No, if God could be defined, God would not be God. But we can realize the divine presence. And so Swami Prabhavananda's, my teacher's, first instruction for meditation was the chosen ideal. The chosen ideal is you yourself. No different. Learn to feel that living presence. And we learn to feel that living presence by becoming more and more selfless. As Swami Sridharananda said, we start with the sense, the true feeling, the genuine, sincere feeling, I am. As we awaken to some degree, we have the feeling, I am, and he or she is. We get this sense of this divine presence, this living presence. We begin to feel that living presence. After a time, that reverses, and we say, he or she is, and in a quiet voice, I am. And ultimately, when the realization is complete, we say only, he or she is. That's as close to a definition as can be said. The words in Sanskrit, of course, are Sat Chit Ananda. Existence absolute, knowledge absolute, bliss or love absolute. But we can say those words and we have no idea at all what they mean. We have no idea what existence absolute means. Do we? No, we do not. Knowledge absolute, unlimited knowledge, knowledge without limitation, knowledge, infinite knowledge. Finite mind cannot do that. As Vivekananda said, we're infinite dreamers at living presence. We are infinite dreamers, dreaming finite dreams. Can we know infinite love, infinite bliss? We can realize it. But then when it comes back, I say it because it no longer has a personality. The personality has been left behind. When it comes back, it cannot tell you what it realized. Sri Ramakrishna brought himself to tears trying to tell his young disciples about realization. Because he was of simple heart and simple mind. And when they asked him, he tried to answer. No, we cannot define God. But we know, if we get calm, if we get quiet, even a little bit, we know there's something there. And so pursue it. That's what Sri Ramakrishna means, be mad for God. See that as the most important thing. Set your priorities according to that compass. Very good question. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Dr. Bunch.
I am not so sure about the Eastern versus Western, old age versus young age, because both of them can be challenged. The brain is given a limit of time to function. After that, no matter how smart you are, the degenerating process is going to set in that one. But whatever you have done before that, how you have wired the brain will decide how you become old. So to become old, and say there's a in Indian saying that at 60 the sense of presence of mind goes away. That's what they say. Same way in American we say no fool like an old fool. That means age is not a guarantee. Sometimes age comes all by itself and the buddhi is lagging behind.
Oh, yes.
And we have seen several examples of that one. But one thing is true, and once again by seeing Swami Yogeshananji, once again it was confirmed that somehow, for some reason, those people who have given their life to God, even in the later life, even at that age, they define all of them and they become more and more convinced about the way they have lived life. That conviction cannot come unless it has been deeply rooted and it has been watered from early on, from time to time to time. And therefore you finally come at that stage in which not only you cannot define God, but you don't see the need to define God. That to me is the real mature age.
Yes.
Old or young, I don't know, but mature age. There is no need. That's why Ramakrishna said, I see God. When I see God, many people may misinterpret like I see the picture, I see the light. No. Sometimes when do you understand? Instead of I say, do you see what I mean? So Ramakrishna, when he said, I saw God, he saw God in that sense.
Exactly.
That he knew what he was talking about.
Yes.
He perceived, he felt. And he didn't give any proof of that one. If he sees God, then he will take you in a corner and say, in that corner, that's God. No, he didn't do that. So that is the way now I understand. So, like the example that you have given, some people are just pre-wired. They pre-wired to give to the world its utmost need. And these people, like you say, they have given fulfilled the utmost need of the people. And there are only some people whose utmost need is to go deeper in life, to understand the substance of life, to follow the proximate principles of divinity and find fulfillment thereby.
Yes.
That's
It's true that some people seem to be wired that way when they come. Well, Sri Ramakrishna explained it's because of past life experiences. But what Swami Vivekananda said is that it is each of us is called to manifest that divinity now. And it's not limited to any single person or group of people. No matter how large the number, it is available to all of us. It's simply a matter of listening. Mark my footsteps, my good page. Tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. You'll be able to go ahead and accomplish our mission, which is a mission of knowledge and sweetness and service. And that just expands and expands and expands and expands. The more you do it, the more it happens. It's just exactly like everything else in life. If you want to become that tennis champion who can hit reliably a serve into a 9 square inch area on the opposite side of the court. You practice and practice and practice and practice until finally you can hit it so that when you do it and in that 9 square inch area it hits, this time it goes that way, and the next time it goes that way, and the next time it goes directly that way. All within that tiny area. It is amazing what we're capable of, both physically, psychologically, psychically, and spiritually. Swami Prabhupada used to say, you can put all your efforts into worldly life, and if you're diligent and persistent and steadfast, you will accomplish much. You will become wealthy. You will become powerful, whatever it is that you've sought. Or, he said, and then he would drop that hand and raise the other hand. Or you can put those same efforts into your spiritual life. And in the same way, you will succeed. And then he would say, those of you who persist, those of you, and these are his sweet words, those of you who stick on are just a hair's breadth away. So we must never be discouraged. We may feel discouraged as the page, sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. As I've said, we've all felt that. We've all felt that. We've all felt, why did I come to this life? What am I doing here? This is when it's time for us to remember what the instructions are. And as Vivekananda said, we fall 1,000 times, we rise 1,001 times. If ever you want to read a beautiful, from a very Western perspective, you want to read an evocation of the power and the absolute majesty of the human spirit, read William Faulkner's Nobel Prize acceptance speech. William Faulkner, Nobel Prize acceptance speech. It is absolutely, it just makes me get a thrill just to think about it. Because here was this man who was not speaking from Sri Ramakrishna's perspective or Jesus Christ's perspective, or he was speaking as a man who had looked at life with the great penetrating gaze of a great artist and said, this is what life is. And I observe the human spirit, and it is majestic and unconquerable. It will go on and on and on and accomplish more and more and more. And that's true of each one of us. Discouraging as the world may seem right now, this too shall pass. And another thing, if you want to read about this too shall pass, read the poem Ozymandias by
What's the name?
Ozymandias, Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Oh, yeah.
So, is there anything else in the way of questions or comments? This has been wonderful.
Isn't that Vivekananda said dharma is God, but in the beginning stages, it is our mind which is curious to know what is what. So at least in order to express the divinity in ourselves, we have to know what is the divinity is about.
Yes?
I think that is where the crux of the matter, and that is where this mind bothers you. Hey, what is it? But anyhow, in Mandukya, Mantra 7, clearly says what is, it doesn't give you all the information, but it tells you how you have to conceive God.
Well, each of the Upanishads gives us this is what they're trying to do. The it has come back from realization and is trying its best to share. So it comes up with this definition. That if you remember in the Brihadaranyaka, Yajnavalkya goes on and on and on and on. First with Maitreya and then later with the king, tell me, what is it? No, it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than that. Well, of course it's got to be more than that. It's infinite. How can you can't get your lasso around the infinite, no matter how big your lasso is, because infinite is not a measure of big.
But then the comforting thing about knowing the divinity, the moment you enter, someone tells you, yes, this is divinity.
Mm-hmm.
Keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. So it's a self-guiding principle. And at the same time, there's something which would raise the red flag. This is not divinity.
Mm-hmm.
Turn back,
Mm-hmm.
turn back. To have the conviction to follow what divinity says, and the conviction to turn away when it is not divinity. That is what we are trying to achieve in a Vedanta center like
You
this.
just gave a beautiful description of Viveka. Just that's exactly what Viveka is. And that turning away is Vairagya. When we see this is not that, And the most intense practice of this, of course, is for the Advaitin. Who ends up saying anything I can feel, perceive, or think is not that. Until they achieve realization, and then they return and say, oh yes, it is all that. As Sri Ramakrishna said, when he reached the roof, he realized that what the roof was made of, the brick lime and brick dust, that all of the stairs had also been made of brick lime and brick dust. This humble metaphor for everything that we see is Brahman. He or she who sees Brahman in every action, and we study the word action, we think what that means. He or she who sees Brahman in every action attains to Brahman. What does it mean, attain to Brahman? It means becomes Brahman. And then may or may not even return as an it to have anything to say about it. But as Sri Ramakrishna said, first be as mad as Wenceslas was when he said, bring me some meat and some wine and some logs and we're going to take them over to that guy's house, even though it is so freezing cold that a normal person will freeze to death out there. Being mad for God. So, with that, if there is nothing more, and this is wonderful, if there's more, then bring it. If not, then we'll just close with our wonderful chant, again, a translation by Swami Yogeshananda of this ancient prayer for peace. Let there be peace in outer space.
Let there be peace in outer space.
Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters.
Let there be peace in the
Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees.
Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees.
May the gods be peaceful.
May the gods be peaceful.
May the whole universe be pervaded by peace.
May the whole universe be pervaded by peace.
Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being.
Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being.
Shanti, Shanti. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. So now, as all of you who come regularly know, there is a table full of wondrous things to eat, and coffee and tea and so on, for us to continue this fellowship inside the monastery. So please make your way on in there. And since some of you seem to be intent on waiting for me to come in to chant, go ahead and wait unless they've already chanted, and I'll be right in. I won't dawdle.
There are some pictures of Shanti Yogesh.
Oh yeah, if anybody wants to see some pictures and talk about yoga.